Hi everybody, so this is now the second required practical lesson. We did one of them via Zoom and I introduced you to random sampling. Hopefully you've gone away and consolidated that, and I've made a separate video on how to do those calculations and you should have had a go at it. But today we're going to look at the other part of that required practical, and that is using the same quadrat but now to do transect sampling. So this is what we want to be able to do with transect sampling, and to save you reading all that, essentially where random sampling is to estimate the total population of something, so how many daisies are there, or how much grass coverage is there, or how many birch trees are there. This method of sampling is to look at a trend, so how does the amount of grass on the field change between the path and the trees? How does the amount of flowers in a hedgerow change from next to the road to in the park? How does the amount of whelks on a beach change from right next to the sea to right up at high tide? So we're looking for a trend, a pattern between 2 points. But before we look at that, let's just make sure we can still do the maths for the random sampling. If you are a student doing foundation paper, I'm going to give you some hints in a second. If you are doing higher paper, you need to pause the video and do the calculations now. If you're doing foundation, stay with me because I'm just going to give you a few little tips and hints in order to do this. So if you're doing foundation, the first thing you've got to do is turn this into metres. So this would actually be 0.5 metres times by 0.5 metres. And then you can work out how big the quadrat is. Then you're going to work out how big the field is. And then if you do the field divided by the quadrat, you can work out how many quadrats fit in the field. Once you know how many quadrats are in the field, this is telling you there are 31 plants per quadrat. So you can multiply that by how many quadrats there are. The second question asks you one way to improve the estimate, and we can talk about that in a second. Okay, so press pause, have a go at the calculation. The question told us that the quadrat was 45 centimetres by 45 centimetres, and you needed to change that straight away to metres. So 0.5 metres multiplied by 0.5 metres. And if you put that into the calculator, you find that your quadrat is 0.2025 metres squared. Now the question also told you that the field was 100 metres by 50 metres. So if we multiply 50 by 100, we get 5,000 metres squared. I then want to know how many quadrats fit in the field. So I take the size of the field and I divide it by the size of the quadrat. Whoops. Let's just scribble it out. 0.2025. I'm going to put that in my calculator. And I've got a very unwieldy number, and it is, I'm going to write it underneath, it's 24,691 point, I'm going to round to 2 decimal places, 0.36. Okay, so that's how many quadrats will fit in the field. What the question also told us was how many plants there were in a quadrat, and it told us there were 31 plants per quadrat. So I need to multiply 31 by how many quadrats there are to get my answer. Now actually that number is still in my calculator, not rounded. So I'm going to do the calculation without rounding it at all until the end. So that gives me 765,432. And it would be it says 0.0987. So I'm just going to do it to 1 decimal place. In fact, let's round it completely. So it's 0.09, which will be 0.1, which gives us that. So 0.0. Okay, so this many. Those of you doing higher paper, if you wanted to practice your standard form, to write this in standard form, you would say that was 7.7, because I'm having 1 decimal place. I need an integer between 0 and 10. If I have 7.7, my decimal point is here, and it's currently here. So my place value has moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So it's times 10 to the 5. I can't remember what plants they were. Seeing as they're usually daisies, we'll say they're daisies. Okay. So that was a practice question on random sampling that we did last lesson. And today we're going to concentrate on transect sampling. It's all about finding a trend. So here's a beautiful picture of some bluebells in a wood. And the question that might be posed to you is, how do you think the abundance of bluebells changes depending on how deep you go into a wood? And we can find that out by placing quadrats along straight lines and looking at the percentage cover. I'm going to draw you a diagram to show you what I mean. So if we were to imagine that we had got a woodland, so here are my trees in my wood, and I want to know how the amount of bluebells changes from the edge of the wood to the middle of the wood. So you're looking down on it from the sky, that's the woodland. And what I then need to do, so I now need some transects. So transects just means a straight line. So if you were the ecologist doing this experiment, he'd go to the centre of the wood and he'd pick a point and he'd lay a transect out to the edge like so. Okay. He'd then and then he would get his quadrats, and instead of doing it randomly, those quadrats would be placed at particular intervals on that quadrat. So I would put one here, and then one there, and then one there, and then one there, and then one there. So evenly spaced along that transect. And now I'd be able to count the bluebells in each of those 5 quadrats. But that would only show me the trend going in that direction. And for us to be sure that those results were correct, we would also want to go in the other directions. So we might also want a transect. Oh, we definitely don't want a square. Hang on. We want a line. We might also have a transect here, and also one here. And I might do some more, but for this lesson we're just going to do 5. So, 3 transects, each with 5 quadrats on it. So then on this one, I've got to have them in the same positions. So on this line, I'm going to have a quadrat there and a quadrat there. I'm getting a little bit frustrated now with Explain Everything because it keeps changing my pen, resetting it instead of leaving it on what I was on before. And one there, and one there, and one there. And on this one, this is going to have an overlap, one at the beginning, and then one every couple of metres along that transect. So I've now taken 3 transects, and each has 5 quadrat samples. So I'm looking for the pattern. And if it's the same in all 3 directions, then I'll be able to take an average and say that's the overall distribution of those bluebells. Okay, so let's have a look at some results that someone else has collected for us. So in actual fact, the results that we've got, it's for 3 transects, the same as I've drawn on the other diagram, but these results, they've taken 10 samples per transect, but always at the same position. So position 1 down to position 10. Okay, and on this set of results, position 1, I'm going to write it on for you so that we know. Position 1 is the outside of the wood, and position 10 is the inside of the wood. And the first thing we need to do is to work out the mean. So we'll work out the first one together, and then you can have a go at doing the others. So remember that a mean average, you take the 3 values, add them all up and divide by 3. So if I add up these first 3 numbers, I've got 20, 30, 40, 45, 53. And I need to divide it by 3. I'll put that in my calculator. And I get 17.6 recurring. Now I'm going to round that to a whole number because the raw data is whole numbers, so I can't have a mean that is more more precise, than the raw data. So I'm going to round that to 18. Okay, have a go at working out all of the other mean values, rounding it to a whole number. Press pause, and then when you press play again, the answers will be on here. So make sure you press pause, don't cheat, have a go at the maths. Okay, so there's our pattern for our bluebells, starting at 18 for the one that I worked out for you, and hopefully you've worked out these others to show those same numbers. What you're generally asked to do with that data is to plot it on a graph. On an exam paper, you might be asked to do a sketch graph, which is just sort of making an estimate of where the points would be, and you get your mark for labelling the axis and for drawing a line. Or it might be partially plotted on actual graph paper, and you would be asked to finish the plotting accurately and label the axes. So one of two things. We're going to have a go at doing a sketch graph on the next slide. You'll see that it also asks you to describe the trend. We'll do that after we've plotted the graph. And it asks you to talk about what factors might affect the bluebell distribution, and it gives you a clue this time. It's asking you what abiotic factors might affect the bluebell distribution. And we'll talk about that in a second. The question would give you more information to work from. So let's have a little look at a sketch graph. So I've drawn myself some axes, and what you want to do then is label those axes. Now, we always, on a graph, try to put along the bottom, we put the independent variable, so the thing that we've changed. And the thing that we changed was the distance, into or out of the woodland. So distance in metres, okay. And then what we measured was the percentage cover of bluebells. So that's one mark for my sketch graph. Now you don't actually need numbers on a sketch graph, but it makes it much easier to plot. So I'm going to say that this is 0, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't need to use a ruler because it's a sketch graph. And then you need to look back at your results. I can see them on my other screen. But that is telling me that at a distance of 1, this is distance in metres into the woodland. So at 1 metre in, it's at 18, and at 10 metres, it's at 70. So I know I've got to get here sort of between 0 and 70. I'm going to go with 100 because my brain will work in tens better. So at 1, it's about 18, which is going to be about here. At 2, it's 29, so that's probably, let me put my 50 in. 29 is probably about here. Then I've got 39, then 47, 53, 61, 64, 68, 68, whoops, I'm not lining up with my numbers very well, and 70. Now I still haven't got the second mark if that's a sketch graph, because what you must do is put a line on it, like so. So if you remember, it said, describe the trend. So the trend is that as you go further into the wood, the amount of bluebells increases, and that might be a surprise to you. So this here is more bluebells inside the wood. Now if I tell you that bluebells like a moist environment, and that's why they thrive particularly well on a woodland floor, but they do still need sunshine in order to grow and flower, but they flower in the spring. So you do get more bluebells in the middle of a wood because it is moister there and more protected, and they rely on some of the nutrients that have been recycled by the leaves that have fallen off trees. But they flower in the spring before the leaves are on the trees so that they can get the sunlight. So all of those factors are environmental factors that affect the growth of bluebells. So in answering a question about why this is the case, you might talk about nutrients or space or light impacting on where bluebells grow. So that essentially, that first bit there is just what I've been talking about, the abiotic factors that might affect distribution of plants in a wood. And then the bottom bit, a reminder that because we've attached numbers to that, so we've put the percentage of bluebells, there was only 18% cover outside of the woodland, but 70% cover in the middle of the woodland. That's a quantitative measure because we've attached a number to it. instead of just saying there's more bluebells in the middle of the wood. That would be qualitative. The numbers make it a quantitative measure. So what you need to do now is download the exam questions separately. There are a set of foundation questions and a set of higher questions. Ideally, if you download them in Word format, you can type onto them. If you download them in PDF, you can still type on them if you double click it, or if you're lucky enough to have a stylus, you can write onto them. I will go through the exam questions next lesson. Thank you. Bye bye.